Welcome to Jazz Piano Skills. I'm Dr. Bob Lawrence. It's time to discover, learn, and play jazz piano. Well, I hope everyone has been enjoying, I know you have, enjoying the improvisational developmental patterns for the primary sounds of A major, A dominant, A minor, A half diminished, and A diminished. And of course, exploring the various fingering patterns that require conscious shifting of our right hand to establish a proper jazz articulation, and of course, to prepare the hand for continuous ascending and descending movement. Not an easy task, right? Not easy at all. I've said it all along. It takes a serious commitment, endurance, and patience to develop proper hand movement in addition to nailing down the correct chord scale relationship. So if you've been sticking with this program since the beginning of the year, as we have literally explored every key and tackling every key since the start of the new year, right, then you deserve a huge congratulations. You are a member of a very small group of determined people, as I like to say, destined to achieve jazz greatness, jazz success. So let's keep moving forward. Let's keep that motion moving forward and tackle the altered dominant sounds today for A. Of course, I'm speaking of A7 sharp 11, A7 flat 13, A7 flat 9 flat 13, and of course the A fully altered dominant sound as well, the flat 9 sharp 9 flat 5 sharp 5. Right? We've been doing the same process format since the beginning of the year for all our altered sounds for C, F, B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, F sharp, B, last month E, and this month A. Wow. So today you're going to discover essential jazz improvisation exercises. You're going to learn developmental, arpeggio, and scale patterns for the A altered sounds. And you're going to play 5 arpeggio and 5 scale patterns for the A dominant altered sounds of music. The dominant sharp 11, flat 13, flat 9, flat 13, and the dominant fully altered. So, as I always like to say, regardless of where you are in your jazz journey, a beginner, an intermediate player, an advanced player, even if you are a seasoned and experienced professional, you're going to find this Jazz Piano Skills podcast lesson exploring jazz improvisation exercises for A altered sounds to be very beneficial. But before we get down to business, I want to, as I always do at the beginning of every Jazz Piano Skills podcast episode, I want to welcome all first-time listeners to the Jazz Piano Skills podcast. And if you are indeed new to Jazz Piano Skills, I want to, of course, welcome you. I want to invite you to become a Jazz Piano Skills member. There are various membership plans to choose from to help you discover, learn, and play music, to play jazz. So check out jazzpianoskills.com to learn more about all the perks of each membership plan. There are educational weekly podcast packets, the illustrations, the lead sheets, the play-alongs for every weekly podcast episode. There's an online sequential jazz piano curriculum loaded with comprehensive courses, online weekly master classes to enjoy, online interactive fake book, and a private online jazz piano skills community, which hosts a variety of engaging forums. And on top of all that, there's also unlimited, private, personal, and professional educational support available. All of these perks are waiting for you, wanting to help you, as I mentioned, help you discover, learn, and play jazz piano. So when you have a moment, visit jazzpianoskills.com and, of course, become a member. If you have any questions once you get there, looking at the various membership plans or any of the educational perks that go along with the plans, if you have any questions whatsoever, please do not hesitate. Don't give it a second thought to reach out to me. I'm always happy to answer any questions that you may have, spend some time with you, and help you in any way that I possibly can. Okay, so on to the question of the week. Okay, you'll see why I'm laughing here in a minute. This week's question, oh my goodness, comes from Martha Nelson. Martha Nelson living in Huntington, New York. And Martha writes, if you had to pick one jazz piano skill and only one to give a student who is going to be stranded on a deserted island with only the clothes on their back and a piano, what skill would you give them and why? Martha, you're cracking me up. Your question is hilarious and I love it. Absolutely love it. Now, not easy to answer, but nevertheless, I love it and I will do my very best to answer it for you. Okay, as you all know, especially all of you regular listeners know, that there are several essential jazz piano skills that you should have incorporated into your regular practice routine. But there is a skill, I must admit, there is a skill that comes to mind as the one that I would suggest to the castaway. That skill is the ability to play all 60 chords, 12 major, 12 dominant, 12 minor, 12 half diminished, and 12 diminished, using basic block voicings, root third, 5, 7, and inversions. I would tell the castaway, if you gain a command of this skill, you will be able to play all the tunes you want, and if you can play the 60 chords in time as you move from one chord to the next, progressions, right? If you can drop the melody on top of these block chords and their inversions in time, you'll be making beautiful music for years or until you're rescued from the island. So here's a quick example. You all know this tune. Simple block chords in my left hand using inversions with the melody in my right hand, establishing a pulse and playing in time. Indeed. Billy Strayhorn's Take the A Train, right? Simple blocks with the melody, simple blocks using inversions, right? With the melody placed on top, making a whole lot of music. You know, my dad actually preferred when I played tunes like this for him, right? He would, it was so funny. I'd go home to visit, he'd make himself a cocktail, sit down on the sofa, want me to play. He wanted to hear the changes in the melody only. As he used to say, just play the tune. No fancy stuff, okay? You know, there's something to that formula for sure. So if I had to tell the castaway you have one skill to play for the rest of your time on this deserted island, it would be, hey, nail down those 60 chords, block format, root third, 5/7, and their inversions, so that you can begin dropping melodies on top of them and playing the standards. Play all the standards you want to keep your sanity while you're lost at sea. Right? So I hope this helps, Martha. If you have any additional questions or if further clarification is needed, of course, do not hesitate to let me know. Again, I'm always happy to help you, spend some time with you, and provide further clarification if needed. Okay, so let's discover, learn, and play jazz piano. Let's get after these jazz improvisation exercises for the altered A dominant sounds. I've mentioned in previous podcast episodes that students struggle with improvisation more often than not because of poor fingerings. It's not a lack of skill. It's not a lack of theory familiarity. Right? It's not a lack of talent. It's just simply due to immobile hands resulting from poor fingerings. And this is why we have devoted this year, right, to developing fingerings, to trying to answer some really foundational type questions. What constitutes good fingering? What should we look for when establishing fingerings for certain musical phrases? What should we be trying to accomplish with our fingerings? Is there always a fingering option that will reign supreme over other options? Right? What about that golden rule? No thumb on the black note, right? On a black note. So, we've set out to try to dive deeper into these questions and come up with some answers that are going to help us move forward with our jazz piano skills and our jazz piano development. And the whole point of our journey this year is to establish definitive answers for these types of questions, but to circumvent any type of fingering dilemma. In other words, we need to establish a simplistic approach to fingering, and in doing so, establish an unimpaired mobility for our right hand. It all sounds good, right? Because deep down, we know that if we can get our right hand to easily move around on the keyboard, we'll be able to play the tunes that we love, and we'll be able to embellish those tunes. We'll be able to improvise, right? We'll be able to play jazz. And again, this is the entire point. This is the entire objective of this entire year, right? To simplify, to discover a fingering approach, simplify our fingering approach, and establish a fingering conviction that will allow us to begin successfully practicing and establishing fingerings for all of those 60 chords that we were just talking about. And while doing so, explore some typical jazz patterns, language, while we work out our fingering muscle memory that ultimately will free us up to think about musical expression, musical emotion, musical articulation, and musical creativity. All right, so let's get down to business. The educational agenda for today is as follows. Number 1, we are going to explore jazz improvisation exercises for the A altered dominant sounds. Number 2, we will play essential A altered arpeggio patterns that you need to discover, learn, and play. And we'll do so from the root of the sound to the 13th of the sound, using various entry points. The root, the third, the the fifth, and the seventh. Number 3, we will play essential A altered dominant scale patterns that you need to discover, learn, and play. And again, we'll do so exploring the entire sound from the root to the 13th. And we will use the same entry points, the root, the third, the fifth, and the seventh. Number 4, I will be playing all jazz improvisation exercises today using the A flat 9, flat 13 sound. Okay? And number 5, I will be playing all jazz improvisation exercises using a traditional swing groove of 110. So, if you are a Jazz Piano Skills member, I want you to take a few minutes right now, hit the pause button, and I want you to download and print the podcast packets for this episode. Those are going to be your illustrations, the lead sheets, and the play-alongs. Again, your membership grants you access to all of the educational podcast packets for every weekly podcast episode. So I mention it every week. You should be using these podcast packets when listening to this episode to get the most out of it. And of course, you should be using the material, the podcast packets, when practicing as well. So if you are listening to this podcast on any of the popular podcast directories, and there are a gazillion of them, but you're all familiar with like Apple and Google, Amazon, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and on, then I want you to go directly to jazzpianoskillspodcast.com. That's jazzpianoskillspodcast.com to access, download, and to print your podcast packets. And you will find the active download links in the show notes. Okay, and one final but very important message that I include in every episode. If you are listening at this moment and you are thinking that the jazz improvisation exercises for the A altered dominant sounds and the various skills that we are about to discover, learn, and play you're thinking that these skills are over your head, then I would say to you, okay, right? Who cares? So what? No worries, right? Continue to listen. Continue to grow your jazz piano skills intellectually by doing that, by just simply listening to this episode. Because you know what? Every new skill is over our heads when first introduced. But this is how we get better. I stress this to my students all the time. We place ourselves smack dab in the middle of conversations where we absolutely have no idea what they're talking about. We are hearing things that we've never heard before. We're hearing words that we've never heard before. And so we're forced to grow intellectually. And I say it all the time. All musical growth begins upstairs, mentally, conceptually, before it can come out downstairs physically in your hands. So the very first step, always listen. Listen. Listen to this podcast lesson now to discover and to learn. The play will come in time. It always does. I guarantee it. Okay, now that you have your lead sheets in your hands, your podcast packets, I want you to grab your lead sheets. I want to point out a few things. And you will see that lead sheets 1 through 4 deal with arpeggio motion for the altered sounds. And lead sheets 5 through 8 deal with scale motion for the altered sounds. You will also notice that the jazz improvisation exercises are the same for all 4 altered A dominant sounds, for the sharp 11, the flat 13, the flat 9, flat 13, and the fully altered sound, the flat 9, sharp 9, flat 5, sharp 5. The exercises are, of course, modified to reflect the proper sound. You'll also notice that my suggested fingerings are included for every note of every exercise, for every sound. Now, of course, you can modify the fingerings slightly, but be careful, right? Don't remove the intentional hand shifts. They're there for a reason. This is our objective, to get the hand mobility in our right hand. So you might look at a line and think, oh, you know what? This will be a lot easier just to remove that hand shift and play that line across my fingers here. That's what it may look like and may feel like that initially, but I promise you, you're working against the objective when doing that. So do not remove the intentional hand shifts that are built into these patterns, right? And again, the fingerings, using these type of fingerings are what's going to allow you to play with a proper jazz articulation. So you, like I said, you may be inclined to change the fingerings because you think it feels more comfortable or it's easier, but your easier may actually make it harder for you to play with proper jazz articulation. So I'm just throwing caution to the wind as I always do here, right? Just be careful. Okay, so grab in your lead sheet packet, I want you to grab lead sheet 3, skill 3, and lead sheet 7, skill 7. These lead sheets deal with the altered dominant sound with the flat 9, flat 13. Okay, now, of course, your job is to play these exercises, these patterns for all the altered sounds, but for the sake of the podcast and the sake of time, I always focus on one specific sound to model all of the exercises for you, and then it's your job to go and do this for all of the altered sounds. You have all the lead sheets here again in front of you, but for listening to this episode, grab lead sheet 3, lead sheet 7. Okay, so lead sheet 3 deals with arpeggio motion. We have 5 exercises, A, B, C, D, and E. Okay, these are the same five exercises that we've been dealing with all year, but in different keys. And as I mentioned, all of these fingerings that you see notated on your lead sheet all have intentional hand shifts. Even letter A, we have a 4-note. We're dealing with a simple 4-note arpeggio launching from the root to 7. We have an arpeggio from the 3rd to the 9th. We have an arpeggio from the 5th to the 11th. And we have an arpeggio from the 7th to the 13th. So yes, you could play these simple little motifs, these simple little arpeggios with no hand shift. Absolutely you could, but that's not, again, that's not the objective. So you'll see those fingerings in there have our hand moving. That's what we want, okay? So I want to bring the ensemble in right now. I'm going to play each pattern from each entry point 4 times before moving on to the next pattern. And again, I'm playing all of these exercises today at a tempo of 110. And as I always mention and always encourage you to do, slower tempos are fantastic. Always begin practicing at a tempo that's going to allow you to succeed. So if that's 60, fantastic. If it's 70, great. If it's 50, no problem, right? A tempo that allows you to succeed and focus on utilizing these fingerings and playing with a good feel and a good jazz articulation. So let's bring the ensemble in. Let's listen to letter A. I'll play the A7 flat 9 flat 13 sound up front, about 4 measures to get into the tempo and the groove and the feel. And then I will begin playing each one of those exercises, again, 4 times each. Okay? All right, here we go. Let's check it out. Fantastic, right? I mention this every month as well. These arpeggios, heck, I mention it every week. These arpeggios from the root, from the third, from the fifth, from the seventh, nice simple ascending lines. I can't begin to stress to you how important it is to be able to play these 4-note motifs with a nice relaxed feel using great fingerings like we have notated here, and great articulation, right? So important. And if you focus on letter A immensely, I tell you what, you will be doing yourself a huge favor. But let's move on to letter B. Letter B is pretty much very similar, right? Instead of a simple 4-note arpeggio, as we were doing in letter A, we're going to add just a slight contour to our line. So we get this. Right? So again, fingerings have intentional hand shifts built into them. Again, we're using 4 entry points, the root, the third, the fifth, and the seventh. Okay? So let's bring the ensemble in and let's check out letter B. I'll play each motif 4 times. Here we go. Fantastic. Okay, so now letter C. And I love letter C because the hand, it's obvious that the hand has to shift. Look at our fingerings. 1-4, 1-4, 2-1, right? So we get, this hand has to move. There's a big time shift taking place there. The 1, and then check it out. Our thumb goes up onto the C sharp, right? In order to play this phrase correctly, this line, this motif. So great fingerings here for letter C for the entry point of the root, from the third, from the fifth, and from the seventh. Again, exploring the entire sound, right? That's why we do these entry points. We want to become, ultimately, we want to become root independent, where we can jump in and out of a sound at any point. And we can see the sound from various, or see various fragments of the sound, even if the root's not included, right? So there's a method to the madness here. So let's bring the ensemble in. Let's check out letter C. 4 motifs, again, 4 entry points, root, third, fifth, and seventh. Check out the hand shifts. Here we go. All right. Letter D, as it always does, letter D deals with eighth note triplets. And triplets are tricky, especially when you have triplets back to back to back, right? And we have our fingerings that have intentional hand shifts built into them. Triplets are always a rhythmic pattern that is easy to rush. It is easy to get out in front of the eighth notes, of the eighth note triplet, and rush. So be aware of that. Relax. Slow the tempo down. Even if you're playing letter A, B, and C at a faster tempo, it's okay to play D at a slower tempo to nail down the articulation of these eighth note triplets, as well as to secure the proper fingerings. So let's bring the ensemble in and let's check out letter D. Here we go. Not easy, right? Not easy. Again, slow the tempo down. Slow it down. All right. It's hard to believe we're on to letter E, our last arpeggio exercise for today, dealing with the A7 flat 9 flat 13 sound. Same format though, right? Root entry, third, fifth, seventh entry points. Our musical phrase gets a little longer now, playing through the bar line. So it's not just a one measure idea. We have to play through the bar line. So let's bring the ensemble in. We're back to eighth notes again, no triplets. Thank goodness, right? So we're back to eighth notes. Letter E, I'll play each motif 4 times. Here we go. Check it out. Quite a workout, no doubt about it. Arpeggio motion, quite a workout. So now we're going to turn our attention to scale movement, to scale motion. Same sound, A7, flat 9, flat 13, right? Same sound, same approach, right? We're going to use 4 entry points, the root, third, 5, and 7 for the next 5 exercises, letter A, B, C, D, and E on lead sheet 7, scale 7. So, but just scale motion now, right? So look at letter A. We're just simply ascending through the sound, the scale, from the root to the 7th, the 3rd to the 9th, the 5th to the 11th, and the 7th to the 13th. But again, our fingerings have our intentional hand shifting taking place. So you might want to mark that, make a little note of that, and pay attention to it when you're practicing for sure. We want to develop proper muscle memory. So the fingerings need to be nailed down. So let's bring the ensemble in. Let's take a look and listen at letter A from lead sheet 7, scale 7. Here we go. Check it out. Okay, so letter B, just as we did with the arpeggio movement, we added a little contour to our scale, right? So instead of just going straight up the scale, right, now we're going to have a little contour to the scale. Right, just a simple little contour to add a little interest to our scale movement. So let's bring the ensemble in. Let's check out letter B, A7, flat 9, flat 13, scale motion from the root, from the 3rd, from the 5th, from the 7th, exploring the entire sound. Here we go. So, we have to explore eighth note triplets with our scale movement, just as we did with our arpeggio motion. So letter C does that, right? As it always does. Letter C, A7 flat 9 flat 13. We have 4 eighth note triplets, back to back to back to back, ascending motion through the bar line into measure 2. Okay, and again, with these eighth note triplets, even if you're playing the other exercises at a faster clip, a faster tempo, by all means, it's okay to isolate letter C and to play it at a much slower tempo. We want to nail down the articulation, the feel, and of course, the proper fingerings as well. Okay, so let's bring the ensemble in and let's check out letter C. Here we go. Focus on the eighth note triplet because jazz literature is laced with eighth note triplets. So there's no hiding, there's no avoiding, right? The eighth note triplet. You can't hide from it, you can't avoid it. You have to attack it and address it and practice it. And that's why we have it included in our arpeggio motion, and we deal with it with our scale movement as well. Okay? So now on to letter D. Our melodic ideas are getting longer. They are moving through the bar line. We're back to just straight eighth notes again. No eighth note triplets, thank goodness. But we have our intentional hand shifts moving through this scale motion. Again, using our same 4 entry points, root, third, fifth, and seventh. So nice, right? To have a formulaic approach that you apply to various sounds, practicing specific skills, right? You must have some formulaic, systematic approach to practicing so that you can properly assess your progress. Without it, there's no way to assess. Okay, so now letter D, let's check it out. Here we go. Wow. We are down to our last exercise for today. Last scale movement exercise, but the last exercise of the day. So letter E, again, our motif, our melodic line gets a little bit longer. We're playing again, of course, through the bar line. 2 measures, eighth note movement, ascending motion from the root, from the third, from the fifth, and the seventh. Quite a few hand shifts taking place inside these lines. So always, again, a good idea maybe to mark those with your pencil where they're taking place, and then to keep your fingerings consistent again. Muscle memory is the name of the game here, right? Instinctual muscle memory when playing these types of lines that are common within jazz literature, jazz language, jazz melodies, jazz improvisation. So let's bring the ensemble in. Let's check out letter E. Here we go. Well, as always, fastest hour of the week, right? We've unpacked a ton of information in one very short, one very, very fast hour. And again, even though I played these exercises, all of these improvisation exercises today, using the dominant flat 9, flat 13 sound, only for the sake of time, right? You need to practice the exercises for the dominant sharp 11 sound, dominant flat 13 sound, and the dominant fully altered sound as well. The flat 9, sharp 9, flat 5, sharp 5, right? They're all laid out for you in your Lead Sheets podcast packet with fingerings included, right? And remember, you can modify the fingerings, but don't be removing those hand shifts, right? Don't work against the objective that we've set out to achieve with our hand shifts within each one of these melodic motifs, exploring the entire sound from the root to the 13th. So you have a ton to tackle this week. You have a ton to practice, no doubt about it. Use your time wisely. Next week we will jump into a bebop tune to examine the various melodic shapes and their fingerings that are found within that little treasure chest. So again, I want to encourage all of you Jazz Piano Skills members to be using your podcast packets, your illustrations, your lead sheets, and your play-alongs to guide you as you study and practice, right? These are educational tools that will help you gain a mastery of the jazz piano skills conceptually, physically, and of course, musically. And most importantly, be patient, right? Give yourself a little slack here, right? Cut yourself some slack. Be patient, right? Developing mature professional jazz piano skills takes time. The reality is, the truth is, it takes a lifetime. So begin structuring your improvisational development after the playing demonstrations that I modeled for you today in this podcast episode, and I guarantee it, you're going to begin to see, feel, and hear your musical progress. Well, I hope you have found this Jazz Piano Skills podcast lesson exploring jazz improvisation exercises for the A altered dominant sounds to be insightful and, of course, to be beneficial. Don't forget, if you are a Jazz Piano Skills Ensemble member, I'll see you Thursday evening at the Jazz Piano Skills Masterclass. It's going to be online, 8 p.m. Central Time, to discuss this podcast episode lesson, exploring jazz improvisation exercises for the A altered dominant sounds in greater detail, and of course, to answer any questions that you may have about the study of jazz in general. You can always reach me if you have questions during the week. You can always reach me by phone, 972-380-8050. My extension here at the Dallas School of Music is 211. If you prefer email, my email address is Dr. Lawrence, drlawrence, @jazzpianoskills.com. Or there's a nifty little SpeakPipe widget that is found on every page throughout the Jazz Piano Skills website that you can send me a message that way as well. Well, there's my cue. And that's it for now. And until next week, enjoy the jazz improvisation exercises for the A altered dominant sounds, and most of all, have fun as you discover, learn, and play jazz piano.